Alright, welcome everyone. Today is day 11 of virtual learning, Monday, March 30th. The first thing I asked you to do is watch a quick video. I'm going to go over a few key points from that video and then review the assignment from Friday and give you an introduction to the assignment for today's class. So the video you watched was about the Age of Reason, which is also known as the Enlightenment. It's the name they give to this time period in history, the history of Western civilization, mainly European history, that followed the Renaissance. And these are a few things that you should be familiar with already based on the assignments from last week. That word enlightenment actually means a time of illumination. Illumination means to brighten things up. So really what's being brightened up is people's understanding of the world. It says during this period, tremendous improvements in the understanding of math and science occurred, and bold new ideas regarding basic human rights and democracy were developed that served as major inspirations to revolutions in both America and France. And that's something we're going to get to this week, how these new ways of thinking about the world are going to inspire people to demand changes in the kind of government that they have. And that begins in the United States, or with the creation of the United States, but it's going to inspire many other revolutions in other places like France as well. So on Friday, I did review with you the assignment about the scientific revolution. You learned a little bit about Copernicus and Galileo and Kepler and Newton, and I asked you to watch the Brain Pop video about Isaac Newton. Today, what I review will also get into a few details about those guys and the scientific revolution, and then some quotes from famous Enlightenment thinkers. But what you focus on today, the assignment you're going to do on Active Classroom, will be about some of these famous Enlightenment philosophers, people like John Locke, Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, ideas they had, how that influenced politics and society. So the first thing I'm going to do with you is review the Atlas activities about the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment that you should have worked on Friday, and then I will introduce what you're going to work on through Active Classroom. At the end of this, the page I'm making in Verge, there's going to be another video about Enlightenment philosophers, which again is short, just a quick summary of some of the things that you should learn about important people from the Enlightenment. I'll jump right in. So this was Friday's assignment, the document I attached that went with pages 94 and 95 of the Atlas of World History. I attached a PDF for that. All you had to do was open up that Word document and complete the fill in the blanks and answer the questions that went with it. So I'll read you the introduction to this section, but this should be familiar to you. So this section was all about the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. It says the 17th and 18th centuries have been called the Age of Reason. People began to question religion, science, and government. Scientists developed the scientific method, testing old ideas against new observations made with more precise instruments. So the tools they were using were better. It says the resulting scientific revolution completely changed how people saw the world. Philosophers and governments hoped to replace older ideas of government and society with new ones that worked better. This movement was called the Enlightenment. Enlightenment philosophers concluded that society was a voluntary group of free and equal people. This encouraged people to fight for freedom and equality. So again, many of these ideas are going to influence the leaders that create the government in the United States, that will go on to create the government in France, and many other places around the world. And these ideas are still inspiring people. Okay, the first section, gathering the facts, asked you to fill in a few blanks. So based on what you just read, you should see the first blank was during the Age of Reason. People began to question religion, science, and government. Second says, new observations with more precise instruments led to the scientific revolution, which changed the way people thought of the world around them. Now that was something that you learned about even with the one-page assignment I gave to you on Thursday. So this is just kind of reinforcing what you've already seen there. Third says, Enlightenment philosophers encouraged people to fight for freedom and equality. And we're going to see some quotes from them today, and you're going to read more about them when you get to the assignment in Active Classroom. Page 94 had those facts and a picture, but also this timeline. And this shows you all these different people, scientists who were coming up with new ideas that were part of the scientific revolution. So going all the way back to 1550 and up to the year 1800. For number 4, this was a guy you read about in the assignment I gave you from Thursday. It says in 1543, your answer should be Nicholas Copernicus. He theorized that 7 planets revolve around the sun. Remember, he was challenging that old belief that the Earth was at the center of the universe. Copernicus is the one that said, no, it's the sun at the center and the planets that revolve around the sun. Kepler, I mentioned him even though he wasn't in the reading. I mentioned him in my review on Friday. Kepler was a guy that learned that planets have this elliptical orbit around the sun. They don't orbit in a circle. It's more of an elliptical kind of oval-shaped orbit. So he's the one that discovers this or proves this, the kind of path the planets will follow around the sun. And then the man who discovered Jupiter has moons using a telescope, you should remember, was Galileo Galilei, and that was someone that you've learned about previously as well. And then remember with his telescope he spotted craters on the moons that revolve around Jupiter, and he was the one that recognized, hey, these moons revolve around Jupiter the same way that Copernicus said the planets revolve around the sun. We're going to talk about how that gets both of these guys into trouble with somebody or a group later on. So remember, the old theory that the Earth was at the center of the universe is called the geocentric theory, and this new idea that no, it's the sun and everything that revolves around the sun is called the heliocentric theory. So Copernicus, Galileo, they're saying it's the sun at the center, it's the heliocentric theory. Okay, there are a few things in the time and change section after the parts about Galileo and Copernicus. I just asked if you looked at the timeline, which one came first? William Harvey published his findings on how blood circulates through the body, or Anton van Leeuwenhoek improved the microscope and observed bacteria? Well, if you looked at the timeline, you should have seen William Harvey made his observations about how blood circulates back in 1628, and this guy Van Leeuwenhoek improved the microscope in 1674. So which one comes first? It's William Harvey. That's all they're asking you to do there. Hopefully it didn't confuse you too much. I saw a few people weren't quite sure what to write. The question just asks which guy, made his observations, or which thing happened first, and it's Harvey. Okay, the next one asks for a fill in the blank. In 1687, who published his theory of gravity, explaining why the planets stay in orbit? You should have remembered this from the previous lesson. The guy that saw apples falling from a tree and wondered, is it that force that also keeps the planets in orbit around the sun? His name was Isaac Newton. So Newton published that theory of gravity, explaining why he believed planets stayed in orbit. Okay, thinking about history, number 9. It says, why do you think some scientists were denounced or criticized by religious authorities? Remember I said that Copernicus and Galileo, they were not popular. They were not popular with religious leaders. And many of these religious leaders are saying, hey, you're contradicting what the church has to say. In other words, you're going against what the church has been teaching all along. Remember, the church taught people that God had put the earth at the center of the universe. So why are they criticized? Well, they're contradicting the Bible. They're going against what the Bible says. And if they do that, they're challenging the church's power. The church is worried, well, if they prove that we're wrong about the earth being the center of the universe, and people stop believing that, maybe they're going to question everything we teach them, and we'll no longer have the influence we have and the power we have over people's lives. So the church, remember, put Galileo on trial. He had to take back what he said, or he was going to be put to death. Okay, Antoine Lavoisier is pictured here with his wife, Marianne. 10a says, what did Lavoisier prove? Well, Lavoisier does experiments, and he proves that matter cannot be created or destroyed. It only changes form. Now, it mentions in the picture here that his wife recorded all the experiments they did, wrote down the results, translated them into English, and she also drew illustrations. She drew pictures of whatever equipment they used. So you have to think about this. Why is it important that she drew or made drawings of all the equipment that they use in their experiments? Well, scientists want to learn from other scientists, and they want to know, how did you do this experiment? What if I want to do the experiment myself? What equipment do I need, right? So the fact that she made these drawings was important. It's all part of the scientific method. We need to be able to replicate this experiment, to do it more than once, to prove what you discovered is actually true. So scientists are going to want to know what instruments were used so they can repeat it. That's all part of this process called the scientific method. Okay, for the people in the environments section, it just asks you to highlight which field the scientist was studying in, and you have to pay attention to this little key here. At the top of the page, there's a key with these little drawings. If it had a little telescope, that means the person was working in astronomy or was an astronomer. If it's a little beaker with something inside of it, that person was working in chemistry, so that would mean it's a chemist. And if it has a little microscope, that person worked in biology or is a biologist. So that's all you had to look for, the little symbol next to the person's name to tell you is he an astronomer, a chemist, or a biologist. I'm just going to show you my page so you can see what you should have had highlighted. The first one I did for you, William Herschel, was an astronomer. If you look, for example, Isaac Newton, if we go back and find Newton on the page, right here, it talks about when he published his theory of gravity, but next to that year, it has the tiny little telescope, so we know he's an astronomer. Carl von Linné was a biologist, Robert Boyle, a chemist, Antoine Lavoisier, a chemist, and Andreas Vesalius was a biologist. All right, that's what you should have had for each of those. Into the next section, it asks you to look at this map to find all these answers. I'm not going to write them out for you, but I'll point out where you're going to find the answers for each one. Question 17 asked, which type of ruler introduced uniform laws? What that means is laws that everybody would have to follow. And if you look on the map, one of the little facts here is that enlightened despots introduced uniform laws. What that means is kings or queens, rulers who believed in some of these Enlightenment ideas. You're going to read more about them in the activity today. But they're the ones that introduce uniform laws. So for answers, question 17, you should have said enlightened despots. 18, how far east did Enlightenment ideas travel? Several people were confused by this. If you just look, these arrows are showing you where Enlightenment ideas went to, and the country that's furthest east here would be Russia. So all you have to put for 18 is Russia. That's the farthest location for where Enlightenment ideas traveled to. 19 says, which country limited the power of its monarchy in the Glorious Revolution? One of the facts they point out, in 1688, the Glorious Revolution limits the power of the monarchy, and that happened right here in Great Britain. Okay, remember, Great Britain is eventually what they call England and several other countries that come under its control. Today, we might call it the United Kingdom. Great Britain, same thing. Okay, so for 19, the Glorious Revolution occurred in Great Britain. 20, how did Enlightenment ideas spread? Several people were confused by this. You had to take a look over here at the little caption. It says pamphlets, books, and letters from Enlightenment thinkers encouraged political change. So that's how their ideas spread. Remember, at this time, there is no internet. There is no radio. There are no TV sets. There are no movies. The only way to get your information out there is through books or letters or through the written word or speeches. But that's what you want for number 20. How did the idea spread? Pamphlets, that means short little books, books and letters. 21. Enlightenment ideas primarily came to the Americas from which two countries? This was another one that confused people. So how did these ideas get to the Americas? How did these ideas influence the people that were living in the colonies in Americas? Remember, Britain had taken over land where the United States is now. How did these ideas get to them? Or excuse me, where do they come from? If you look, you have an arrow saying it's going to the Americas, and this arrow is coming from two places, right? One is France, and one is Great Britain. So for 21, Enlightenment ideas came to the Americas from Great Britain and France. That's all you needed. A bunch of people put Canada, North America. That's not explaining where the ideas came from. The ideas came from these countries, Great Britain and France. And 22, which country had no king in 1648? If you look carefully, you'll see a little fact here. In 1648, this newly independent Netherlands has no king and allows all religions. So the country is the Netherlands, and what's also known as Holland. All right, the last section just asks you to identify the author of each quote. And you had it written right here, so this shouldn't be too tough. The first quote, 23, says, a multitude of laws, often hampers justice. That came from an Enlightenment philosopher named René Descartes, a very famous person. He also is famous for saying, "I think, therefore I am." The activity you're going to do in active classroom is going to have you read that, so I won't talk too much about that. But René Descartes, one of the pioneers of the field of philosophy. 24, the quote is, "The people, being subject to the laws, ought to be their author." That comes from a man named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, which is listed, that quote is listed right here. So essentially he's saying, if we have to follow laws, we should be allowed to decide which laws we have to follow. It's kind of the idea that we should have self-government, some control over the rules we have to follow. 25, sovereign power is conferred by the consent of the people. That comes from a man named Thomas Hobbes. And what he's saying is, people are the ones that give power to the government. If the government's going to have power, it should be based on our permission. These are all ideas that influence leaders who will create the government in the United States and many other places around the world. 26, all men are by nature free. That comes from a man named Voltaire. And we'll talk about that. Some people didn't believe that. He thought men are born free, and it's the governments that restrict their rights or imprison them in a certain way. 27 says, people unite for the mutual preservation of their lives, liberty, and property. Well, that's a very famous quote from a man named John Locke. And John Locke has a very big influence on leaders like Thomas Jefferson and other key American leaders who will create famous documents like the Declaration of Independence and later on the American Constitution. But those ideas are borrowed heavily, ideas that came from John Locke. And the last one, it is necessary, number 28, that power should be a check. It should say to power. And that came from a man named Charles de Secondat, Baron de Montesquieu. Montesquieu is really kind of how we'll refer to him. But he's another guy that comes up with ideas that influence the creation of the Constitution of the United States. One of the reasons why the U.S. government has 3 branches, the legislative, executive, and judicial, is because of Montesquieu's idea that people will be safer from government abuse if the government divides its power into different branches. And that's something you may have learned about in your civics class already, but you'll learn about that more in U.S. history, and we'll touch on that a little bit in this class too. Alright, so that was a review of the assignment I put up for Friday. Many of you have already submitted that. The assignment for today is an active classroom. It's all about the Age of Reason in Europe. And what you're going to do is read a little bit more closely about some of these key Enlightenment philosophers. If you look, you're going to see, you'll read a section about Descartes, about Rousseau, Montesquieu and Voltaire, John Locke, some of the enlightened monarchs, so the part they mentioned about enlightened despots, you read more about them, and a few other things that are connected to the Age of Reason. Okay, if you go through this PowerPoint, you can click on it there, but it'll also have it embedded in the page. After this video, you're going to see a short video about Enlightenment philosophers, or I'll put it below the link in Active Classroom, so you can watch that just as a summary of some of the things you should know about these key Enlightenment philosophers. Okay, that was all I had to talk to you guys about today. I will make sure I review the assignment that you work on for today and go over that for you. And remember, please stay on top of these assignments and submit them as quickly as possible. Many of you are doing a great job with that. Others, try to make sure you're turning them in more quickly so I can give you credit and put those things in the grade book. And I am putting grades in as quickly as I can, so stay on top of those things. Send me a message or shoot me an email if you need help with anything. All right? Otherwise, have a great day.